Good afternoon, everyone. I, Dr. Sheetal Sane, welcome you all for this wonderful scientific meet today. Um it's a meeting hosted by AMWN. AMWN is such a wonderful organization and unique in its nature. As we just discussed, it brings all of us, all female doctors of different faculties under one roof, and getting us a nice way to interact. So today we have gathered for two important events. One is Dr. H.R. Salkar oration, the fifth one in the series. And second is a hot topic, that is COVID-19 vaccination. So first of all, I request the president of AMWN, Dr. Mridul Chande ma'am, to start the session with her welcome speech.
Thank you, Sheetal. On behalf of AMWN, I welcome you all to the Harsha Salkar Memorial Oration, which is fifth in the series. In fact, AMWN will be grateful to the generosity of Dr. Ramesh Salkar and family. And I take this opportunity to extend, as you all know, that that late Dr. Harsha Salkar was the first nephrologist of, and this yearly oration is a befitting tribute to the great teacher and superb human being, I would say. Due to COVID-19, though we could not have it in person, but thanks to technology, that at least on this technical platforms, we can meet, we can see, and we can discuss and continue with our academic activity. And I'm truly delighted to welcome Divya Bajpayee, a very well-known nephrologist from KM Hospital, Mumbai, who has so kindly accepted our invitation. Welcome, Dr. Divya. She will be delivering the oration and enlightening us on pregnancy in chronic disease, which is really a complex issue. Friends, it seems that year 2020 was COVID-19 pandemic year, and 2021 is going to be COVID-19 vaccine year. But there are a lot of misgivings, rumors, and all sorts of negative sentiments taking rounds amongst public. So keeping that in mind, we decided to have a panel discussion on this burning topic, particularly in public interest. So let us hear from the experts and get rid of all the misgivings. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Radha Minje, going to clear all the doubts. And we have Mrs. Vinita Bhatia, who is going to represent the common public, so that we get to know what anxiety, what doubts, or what misgivings they have. So I'm sure this is going to be a really very, very interesting session. And trust me, after listening to Dr. Radha and Dr. Deepti, all your doubts will definitely be shown the doors. So I take this opportunity to welcome the convener, the moderator, Dr. Rajeshri Kaur. Welcome, Rajeshri, who has been instrumental in organizing such a wonderful event. Last but not the least, a warm welcome to all the attendees who have logged in. So friends, stay tuned in to update your knowledge and get rid of all the doubts. So once again, I welcome you all. Thank you so much. Over to Sheetal.
Today we have a oration of, this is the fifth year, in name of respected late Dr. Mrs. Harsha Salkar ma'am. We all know her as a great clinician, great academician, and a great human being as well. Oration is an apt tribute in her memory, whereby we are enlightened with scientific knowledge. This year, the oration is titled as Women's Health and Pregnancy in Chronic Kidney Disease, and it will be delivered by Dr. Divya Bajpayee. Incidentally, today is birthday of Dr. Amit Salkar, who's a cardiologist, son of Salkar ma'am. We all, on behalf of AMWN, wish him a happy birthday. For this occasion, now I invite chairpersons. First, Dr. Manorama Purwar ma'am, who is a senior gynecologist of the town and needs actually no introduction. She is a senior and active member of AMWN. She is presently secretary of AMWI. She has many publications in national and international journals to her credit. I also invite Dr. Vandana Baraskar to chair the session. She is consultant nephrologist in German renal care at IGGMC. She was a lecturer and nephrology head at NKP SIMS, Nagpur. She is now also consultant nephrologist at Baraskar Hospital. She was trained under Padma Shri Dr. M.K. Mani sir and has received Best Paper Award also. Now I hand over this mic to the chairpersons for the proceedings of the oration, Dr. Purvar ma'am and Dr. Vandana Baraskar ma'am. Please take the charge.
Good afternoon. Welcome you all for prestigious Harsha Salkar oration. A few lines about Dr. Harsha. She was born in 1950 in Dotiwala family of Amravati and was fondly known as Honey, a very appropriate name for her. She was sweeter than honey. To pursue her medical graduate in 1967, she joined GMC Nagpur and graduated in 1971 and had post-graduation in 1976, and subsequently she joined Department of Medicine as lecturer. Over a period of time, she was promoted to all the posts, and lastly she occupied the highest post, that is professor and head of department. As a classmate and as a hosteler, since our first year of MBBS, we were very, very good, thick friends. And surprisingly, for both of us, whether it was an appointment in the department or promotion to the various posts, it was on the same date. Coming to that is her contribution. Down to memory lane, I am recollecting she was the first house officer and the registrar to work in kidney unit, which was established in 1971. And subsequently, she had a lion's share in establishing department, and which has really helped hundreds of the patients who were in need of dialysis, not only from Vidarbha, but from the adjacent states such as Madhya Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and even she used to get the patient from Uttar Pradesh, which is quite far away from Nagpur. She was very instrumental in starting a renal unit at Super Speciality Hospital, Nagpur. In 2008, she retired from GMC and joined NKP Salve Institute of Medical Science and Lata Mangeshkar Hospital. And within an year of joining, she established dialysis unit there. And this shows her passion for kidney unit and helping and serving the patient who were in need of dialysis. Even I'm recollecting when she was a resident and I was a resident in OBGY, she used to get a call for peritoneal dialysis. And if I'm not on a duty, I used to accompany her because she has to wait till the dialysis is finished. And during this time, I have learned a lot of medicine from her. That was the great. In 1997, about her academic things, in 1997, she started Central India Nephrology Society, and she was being the founder president. And under this society aegis, they hosted the nephrology conference West Zone, and she was organizing secretary. As a tribute and in the fond memories of such a great person, a dynamic person, great academician, astute clinician, inspiring teacher, dependable friend and colleague, and most important, great human being and the most loved person. The oration was started. The first oration was delivered by a very dynamic lady, Dr. Vatsala Trivedi from Mumbai. That was on 16th December 2016 at AMWI conference, which was held at Nagpur. And the topic was renal implant, what is new? Transplant, what is new? The second oration was delivered by Dr. Kalpana Mehta from Mumbai, and the topic was preeclampsia and its long-term outcomes. I am proud to say that the third oration was delivered by her own student, Dr. Dhananjay Ukkalkar from Nagpur, and the topic was kidney health for all. The fourth oration was by very eminent anesthesiologist from Hyderabad, Dr. Manimala Rao, and she spoke on fluid responsiveness. And this is the fifth oration. And today we have with us Dr. Divya Bajpayee from Mumbai, and she is going to enlighten us on the women's health and pregnancy in CKD. I hand over the mic to Dr. Vandana to introduce the orator to the august audience. Vandana, over to you.
You can hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Very truly said, madam. I had the opportunity to work with Salkar madam at NKP, SIMS and Lata Mangeshkar Hospital. She was a very sweet person. And this is my great pleasure to introduce you all today's awardee of HR Salkar Oration. Very impressive CV, I must say, and you all will agree at the end. We have Divya Bajpayee with all great achievements and medals throughout in her career. She is a gold medalist in nephrology and academically very strong and intelligent, holding exclusive positions in nephrology field. She is editor of many nephrology journals, international nephrology journals, and awardee of many awards in her career she has received. Presently working at KEM Hospital as associate professor since December 19. With this, I will present you Dr. Divya Bajpayee. Please welcome all her with great round of applause. Please start, Dr. Divya, your oration on women's health and pregnancy in CKD. About the topic, I'll just say a few words. We all know that CKD itself is a major health hazard. It's a major health problem nowadays in developing world, as hypertension and diabetes are on the rise, so as the CKD. Now, being woman with CKD is a special situation, as they have additional disturbances in hormones in female with anemia, hypertension, and mineral disturbances. And with CKD, we have menstrual irregularities and loss of libido. So there is failure to conceive. But if the lady conceives, there are so many problems on the top of it. So it will be like oil to the fire. So better to avoid pregnancy in CKD is what is said. But if they conceive, what all problems we face, there are fetal losses, we have maternal renal function deteriorations. So, and secondly, in second situation, if the lady with pregnancy develops ARF, how she should be followed after pregnancy and how the renal functions should be monitored postpartum is very important to see the long-term effects of that acute renal failure going into chronic renal failures, chronic kidney disease. So here over to you, Dr. Divya, for today's oration.
Thank you, Dr. Vandana, for the kind words. And at the very outset, I would like to thank Dr. Khote Madam, Dr. Mridul Madam, and all the senior colleagues and Association of Medical Women in Nagpur for this opportunity. I'm really happy to be here. I have heard about Dr. Salkar. I could not meet her ever in my life, but I have heard very high words about her from the Nephrology Society, and I really feel, and I'm very impressed by all the work she has done, especially being the first woman nephrologist in Western Maharashtra. and I really hope that I do justice to this oration. I want to share my screen, but someone is sharing the screen. So yeah. So this topic is very close to my heart, actually, and I was very happy that I am speaking on this topic to an association of women doctors. So it makes it extremely relevant. This is the outline of my talk. In the next 30 minutes, I will be stressing about what is the importance of this topic and why we should be discussing this in greater details today and also every day thereafter. And then, as Madam Vandana Madam has correctly pointed out, this is a very huge topic. What I have done is that I have picked up few specific subtopics of that so that we can discuss these in detail. And what I've picked up for today is sexual dysfunction and fertility in chronic kidney disease, pregnancy and chronic kidney disease, and also I want to stress about urinary tract infections in pregnancy, which has bearing on the pregnancy and thereafter. So these are the few things which we'll be seeing in the next 30 minutes. Now, as Vandana Madam has rightly pointed out, that pregnancy and CKD goes hand in hand, but it doesn't end there. As we all know that the burden of chronic kidney disease is increasing day by day. In the year 2018 to 2019, about 6 lakh women died because of chronic kidney disease, and it has now become the 8th leading cause of death in women, and currently over 195 million women are affected with CKD worldwide. There is little evidence, not very robust, but which says that women at a higher risk of CKD as compared to men. Also, as we have seen that women are the one who become pregnant, and pregnancy comes with a whole lot of complications, especially when talking about the kidneys. There are about 76,000 maternal deaths across the world, which are attributed to preeclampsia and eclampsia. And that too in LMIC, that is the lower middle income group countries, of which we are a part, 16% of maternal deaths are contributed to preeclampsia and eclampsia. And what is more shocking is that if a woman gets eclampsia in her lifetime, she is 4 to 5 times more likely to develop kidney failure or end-stage kidney disease in future. So you can say that pregnancy complication increase the risk of chronic kidney disease, and also chronic kidney disease increase the risk of pregnancy complications. And this is a vicious cycle which has bearing on the women health and also on the health of the offspring. But this is not the end of the story. When we talk of women and their risk of kidney disease, they are physiologically at a higher risk. As we see that they get pregnant, they have higher chances of urinary tract infections and also autoimmune diseases because of the hormonal condition in the patient, in the women, hormonal milieu. They are more prone to have autoimmune diseases like lupus and other arthritis and vasculitis. But also there is another phase to this story. Women are at higher risk of getting decreased access to healthcare. And when I say healthcare, I mean not only healthcare, limited access in the acute setting. Like there was a study done in US, even in the developed country like US, they found that when as compared to men, women get hardly 10% of the critical ICU care which they deserve in severe acute kidney injury. Also, when the kidney disease progress and they develop end-stage kidney disease, they get a very limited access to dialysis and kidney transplant. One might feel, even I had a feeling, that this might be related to the poor paying capacity of our family, and people might not be ready to spend over women. But then there is an interesting study which was done in Andhra Pradesh from India, which was published in Kidney International, which says that even when the dialysis was made free, it was publicly funded by the government, even still then the dialysis was hardly utilized by female end-stage kidney disease patients. This points towards the gender disparity, which is somehow ingrained in our culture. And this is why we need to talk to our patients more often about women's health in kidney disease. This doesn't end here. When we talk about organ donation, kidney transplant, we see that women give, but they don't get. This is the data of National Transplant Registry from 2019 to 2013 of India. It was seen that 78% of donors were women. They give to their husbands, their son, their brothers. But when come to receiving the kidney, only 19% of recipients were women. There is a huge gender disparity when we are talking about kidney transplantation. So this is very important for the whole society to realize that a healthy mother or a healthy woman gives rise to healthy subsequent generations. She is the one who gives rise to healthy sons and healthy daughters, and these healthy daughters go on to become healthy women. So it is important to promote women's health, especially when we're talking about kidney diseases, because that is the key to a kidney health in subsequent generations. And that is why we have chosen this topic for this prestigious oration. Coming to the first subtopic which we'll be discussing, that is sexual dysfunction and fertility in chronic kidney disease. I would like to begin with a common case. All the cases which I'm presenting today are real life cases. The names are changed, but all the cases which I have personally seen in my experience. So Mrs. Anushka is a 32-year-old lady with chronic kidney disease. Her creatinine is 2.1. And as per her OPD records, she is labeled as asymptomatic. She also comes and says in the OPD that she doesn't have any complaints. However, on inquiry, she does admit to have irregular menses and decreased libido. We at KM Hospital host a chronic kidney disease clinic of around 100 patients per week. And let me tell you, hardly ever any patient comes and complains upfront these complaints and comes and tells them to us. That is extremely disappointing. That means that we as physicians have failed to generate those complaints from our patients. That doesn't mean if they don't say, they don't have it. We are very well aware that there is a lot of hormonal dysregulation going on in chronic kidney disease, and the degree of hormonal dysregulation worsens as the CKD progresses. CKD is a stage of decreased estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and increased prolactin and LH because of various reasons. And this leads to loss of LH surge and loss of GnRH surge, which leads to finally an ovulation. As we have very eminent gynecologists in the panel and in the audience, you all will be very well aware of this graph, even better than I am aware of it. There are various surges like estrogen, progesterone, and LH surge, which makes a cycle of a normal, healthy, menstruating female. And this is how a cycle of an end-stage kidney disease patient looks like. There are no surges. Only the FSH is persistently high and LH is persistently high, and very low levels of estrogen and progesterone. And this is why they have this whole spectrum of sexual dysfunction. It starts from menstrual disorders. Even 75% females of advanced CKD have menstrual disorders, mainly menorrhagia, oligomenorrhea, amenorrhea, and they can have premature menopause, which can come up to 4.5 years earlier as compared to their healthy counterparts. This premature menopause brings with it a whole gamut of various other problems like cardiovascular diseases, a higher risk of MI, higher risk of atherosclerotic diseases, stroke, and also a very poor bearing on the mineral bone health of the patients, causing them to have more osteoporosis and more fractures. Then they have vaginal disorders like atrophic vaginitis, vaginal dryness, dyspareunia. Then they have decreased libido. They don't talk about it, but they do have decreased libido. There was a study in which it was found that up to 40% patients on dialysis in reproductive age group did not engage in intercourse, even when everything else was normal. And all these features finally contribute to infertility, which is also there because of the anovulatory cycles and amenorrhea. And as you all will agree, these features are interrelated. One will give rise to another, and then the patient goes into the vicious cycle of sexual dysfunction related to the end-stage kidney disease. So what should we do about it? Very briefly, the first thing which we should do about is to recognize it. We should always ask leading questions to our women patients about their sexual history, sexual function, and the problems related to it. And once we recognize them, the early we treat them, the better are the results. As when talking about chronic kidney disease, it is extremely important to address uremia, which is usually the basal cause of all these problems. And once the patient is in advanced kidney disease, we should address this by providing them adequate dialysis and transplant. There is enough data to suggest that transplant and adequate dialysis do to some extent treat this sexual dysfunction, and patients are able to enjoy a better reproductive cycle and even get pregnant and deliver. Then there is a definite scope for hormone replacement therapy, including oral estradiol or estrogen supplementation. However, we should remember that patients with chronic kidney disease need to get this estradiol therapy with dose reduction and dose maintenance. So they need a 50% dose reduction in estradiol therapy. This hormonal replacement therapy doesn't only cure the sexual dysfunction in our patients. However, it also improves cardiovascular and bone health of these patients, which has been recurrently proven by various good quality trials. Finally, prolactin is one of the culprit hormones which has been found to be increased in chronic kidney disease because this hormone is renally cleared. So the prolactin clearance is reduced and it increases and it disrupts the whole hypogonadal axis. And some people have tried bromocriptine with some success to reduce prolactin and establishment of a normal hypogonadal axis and establishment of normal menstrual cycle in these patients. So that was about sexual dysfunction in short. Now we come out to the topic of pregnancy and chronic kidney disease. Coming to the second case for the day, Mrs. Alia is a 29-year-old lady with lupus nephritis. She is on steroids, mycophenolate mofetil, which is the immunosuppression given for lupus nephritis, and is on telmisartan for the control of her blood pressure and proteinuria since the last 6 months. Her creatinine is 1.6 and her proteinuria is 1200 milligram per day. Now she comes to our OPD and she asks us that she wants to plan a pregnancy. She has been married since last 3 years and she really wants to get pregnant. So what will you advise her? Whether you will tell her to it is safe and go ahead and you can get pregnant, just you need to take some precautions, or would you tell her that it is risky to get pregnant now? The answer to this question depends about what are the high risk features in her which makes her pregnant, which makes her prone to maternal and fetal complications. So the major features in lupus nephritis which makes a patient more prone for complications are: first, that is the active lupus disease, active autoimmune disease, underlying CKD, and when I say CKD, I mean about underlying low GFR and proteinuria. The presence of teratogenic drugs, like in this patient, we have mycophenolate mofetil and telmisartan. Both of them have some teratogenic potential, and also presence of hypertension. So these 4 things which we need to have in mind before advising or planning pregnancy for our patients of lupus nephritis in particular and any kidney disease in general. This is a nice systematic review where they have summarized all the complications which can occur in a patient with chronic kidney disease when she gets pregnant. These are the relative risk ratio as compared to women who did not have lupus nephritis. And as you can see, there was a 1.85 times risk of C-section, 1.9 times risk of preeclampsia, 1.99 times risk of hypertension worsening, 1.5 times risk of spontaneous abortion. And see here, a very, very high risk, up to 11 times high risk of thromboembolic disease, a high risk of postpartum infections, which is something which we don't really emphasize many times. Kidney disease patient, when become pregnant, they have a high risk even of postpartum infections, postpartum sepsis, septic shock, and death. Premature delivery, which we all know, and a IUGR, small for gestational age delivery. Also, the baby was at a higher risk, a much higher risk, 2.76 times higher risk of getting admitted in neonatal ICU, and also of congenital defects, because most of these lupus patients were on drugs which can have teratogenicity. So what will be an ideal lupus nephritis patient who can get pregnant? So the ideal patient should have extrarenal disease activity controlled for more than 6 months. Renal disease should be in stable remission for at least 6 months. The best thing is that the renal disease should be in remission for more than a year, but minimum of 6 months is definitely required. they should be on a very low dose of steroid. These lupus patients might not become off steroid ever in their life, but the steroid dose should be very low. That should be less than 5 milligrams in a day. They should not be on a teratogenic medication. They should be on hydroxychloroquine, which is associated with a good pregnancy outcome, and they should be normotensive. When we say normotensive for a kidney disease patient, we take the cutoff of a 130 by 80 systolic, 130 systolic by 80 diastolic blood pressure, and they should be willing for a regular, very close follow-up with their primary physician or with their nephrologist. Each one of these features are very important. In a city of Bombay, we get patients from peripheral of Maharashtra and from other states who fit in all the other criteria, but then they are not able to follow up with us regularly. So then it is our responsibility, or the treating physician's responsibility, to find out a locally available primary care physician with whom they can be following up regularly, as a regular follow-up is extremely important throughout the course of pregnancy and also in the postpartum period. So, but we don't live in an ideal world. So, this our patient, Mrs. Alia, she was advised to wait till the disease becomes inactive and other things are optimized, like her immunosuppression to be optimized. However, she comes to us 4 months later with 8 weeks gestation. Now, as you remember, she is on mycophenolate mofetil. She is on telmisartan. Her kidney disease is not optimally treated. Her lupus is active, and she has presented to us with 8 weeks of gestation. Now, this is a dilemma which, as nephrologists and also as primary care physicians or gynecologists, all of you must have faced a lot of times. That patient comes to us who's not optimum to get pregnant, but she is pregnant. So what do you advise to the patient? Whether we tell upfront that this is risky, just give away with the pregnancy, or we tell that no, you can continue with the pregnancy. Whatever we say, we should always remember that we should be helping the patient to take a decision, and we should not be taking the decision on the behalf of the patient, as there can be, as in this figure, there can be many right ways. Having a child is integral in a woman's life, and that does not change with CKD. Just because she is CKD, that doesn't mean that she doesn't want to become a mother. And the only thing which we should be doing here is that we should be helping them in an informed decision making. And this is important that here, because our role ends here and the patient and the family members' role begin, where they should be facilitated in an informed decision making. So how do we do that? We should tell the patient about the exact proportion of risk. For example, when such a patient like Alia comes to me and tells me that she is on MMF and now she is 8 weeks pregnant, what do I tell her? I tell her that as compared to other patients who have a risk of congenital malformations, mainly cleft lip, cleft palate, and lung malformations and kidney malformations, the risk is somewhere around 0.1 to 1%. Patients who are on mycophenolate mofetil, the risk increases to 15 to 20%. I am supposed to tell her in black and white the risk which she will be having for her and for her baby. And then once they are informed about this, the decision should be made by the patient and their family. And when I say family, I also acknowledge that in my practice, I have seen patients who do not actually want the pregnancy at that time, but however, they are at an immense pressure from their family and extended family to keep the child or to get pregnant. So in that becomes a very, very tricky situation. And also there are lots of ethical sides to that situation. So what we commonly do in such a situation is that we interview the patient alone in a separate room, and we try to find out that what the patient really wants. And that becomes the most important thing for us, that what the patient really wants. But we make sure that she is making the choice after being informed of all the risks to her and to her baby. So if she chooses to keep the pregnancy, how do we manage pregnancy in lupus nephritis or in kidney disease or in other vascular? We we have to ensure that the patient is getting an adequate dose of hydroxychloroquine, which has been supported. Evidence supports that it has a positive pregnancy-related outcome. At least a 6 milligram per kg dose should be given to all these patients. Every patient who has kidney disease, especially lupus, are at higher risk of developing preeclampsia, and they should receive preeclampsia prophylaxis in form of aspirin 75 milligram per day. That should be started as early as 12 weeks in gestation and should be continued at least 6 weeks postpartum. We should be assessing the need of, we will be stopping as a mycophenolate straight away, and we should be assessing the need of adding other immunosuppression to her, which is safer for pregnancy, that namely azathioprine or tacrolimus. Talking about mycophenolate, it should be noted that even planning conception on mycophenolate can be risky. So where are patients who are on these teratogenic drugs, they should be switched to safer drugs like azathioprine or tacrolimus 3 months prior to planning conception. The effect of mycophenolate can remain in the body for up to 3 months. So if I am planning to conceive in the month of March, I should be stopping the mycophenolate in the month of December. And then I can, for 3 months, I should be practicing contraception, and then I can get pregnant in the month of March. There are few red flags or few things which we have to very closely watch when a patient of active kidney disease or active vasculitis gets pregnant. These patients are at a very high risk of developing lupus flare. This lupus flare mostly happen in the 3rd trimester or after the delivery. So what we commonly do is that increase their dose of steroid in the peripartum period. That is 1 month. That once they start at 9 months of gestation, we increase their dose of steroid, and that increased dose of steroid is to be continued in the postpartum period up to the 6 weeks. They are at a high risk of preeclampsia. They should be monitoring their blood pressure at home, and also should come for a regular screening family visits to their family physician. They are also if they develop preeclampsia, they are at a high risk of HELLP syndrome, and they are high risk of thrombotic episodes and fetal complication, which should be very closely monitored. Fetal complication most common here in this case will be a neonatal lupus, which can present as a congenital heart block, which should be screened in all patients who are delivered from lupus nephritis mothers. Regular follow-up with a nephrologist with creatinine, proteinuria monitoring, a BP monitoring at home, and if we think that the patient is going into a renal flare, steroid and tacrolimus will be needed. They should be given option, or rather they should be very strongly advised about institutional delivery and in a setup where a neonatology care is available at hand. Patient postpartum period is extremely crucial for these patients who have active kidney disease. As we know, pregnant patients are anyway more prone to develop thrombosis. With this risk is compounded if they have kidney disease, and they are also at a high risk of lupus flare in the postpartum period. Also, postpartum PIAs, that is postpartum eclampsia, is also seen at a higher frequency in these patients, and they require a postpartum monitoring for that also. This is actually a real life patient with us who was on MMF and was on telmisartan, and she actually delivered a healthy baby at full term at 2.6 who was weighing at 2.6 kgs. Baby luckily did not have any congenital malformations, but this might not be a case. This is just an anecdotal case. Also, I would like to point out here that when the patient is on RAS inhibitor, ACE inhibitor or ARB, they are actually safe in the very initial part of conception. Like it is not like MMF which needs to be stopped pre-conception. ACE-ARB are okay in the conception and in the first trimester. So if someone comes to me taking only an ACE-ARB, I might not ask them to get MTP done, which is the case with mycophenolate mofetil. Moving on to our next case, Mrs. Katrina. She is a 33-year-old lady with chronic tubulointerstitial disease causing a CKD. Her creatinine is 2.3 and she is hypertensive on tablet amlodipine and atenolol. So this lady is not having lupus. She is just having chronic kidney disease, which is with a stable creatinine. She is just born with a small shrunken kidneys, and that's why her creatinine is high. So is she at high risk for maternal and fetal complications? If yes, which are the complications at which she is a higher risk? So yes, she is at high risk of fetal and maternal complications. The rule of thumb when deciding about complication in a CKD is presence of any of these three factors. First is hypertension, BP more than 130/80. Second is creatinine more than 1.5. And third is proteinuria more than a gram. Any patient who has any of these three factors is at a higher risk of developing poor outcome during pregnancy, both for the mother and the baby. So the maternal complication include worsening of kidney disease, more chances of getting an instrumental delivery or a lower cesarean section, more chances of getting preeclampsia and its complication like HELLP. Baby risk includes getting a preterm birth with a low birth weight, having instrumental delivery and associated complication, having IUGR, IUFD or neonatal death, and also risk of malformations in the baby. These are malformations other than those which we have discussed because of the teratogenicity. These are the malformation because of the uremic milieu. Also, these patients at a higher risk of developing future metabolic and kidney disease, namely diabetes, hypertensive, and heart disease. And also, they are at a higher risk of getting kidney disease because they are born with a lower nephron number. A low birth weight baby is born with low nephron kidneys and at a higher risk of developing future kidney diseases. So what should we do to have a healthy pregnancy in CKD? First, as I told you about the rule of thumb, we have to make sure that the patient's hypertension is controlled, creatinine is less than 1.5, and the proteinuria is at least below a gram. All these patients should be on aspirin. BP should be controlled very frequently at home, and the kidney function should be frequently monitored. When I say frequently, I mean that in the first trimester, it should be monitored monthly. In the second trimester, by once in 2 weeks. And in the third trimester, once in every week. They should be, and after the 9th month, they should be institutionalized. ARB and ACE should be stopped as soon as the pregnancy detected, if not at the time of gestation, at the time of conception. And the use of diuretic should be very cautiously done in these patients. Lots of these patients have edema, so they are on diuretic when they are not pregnant. But once they become pregnant, their intravascular volume becomes very labile. If we give them too much diuretic, the intravascular volume decreases. That gives rise to low perfusion of the placenta and the baby and causing IUGR. So diuretic should be given to a pregnant lady with CKD only when there is a risk of impending pulmonary edema or heart failure. Otherwise, the diuretic should be stopped in these patients. How to manage hypertension in these patients? That is the Achilles heel of this condition. A good BP control translates to good outcomes in pregnancy. The BP should be monitored very closely, and both hyper and hypotension should be avoided, as hypotension is equally risky to the mother and the baby in this state. To initiate therapy, the blood pressure should be documented more than 150/100, and the goal in kidney disease should be 130/80 to 150/100. As we all know that various drugs are preferred over the conventional drugs to treat hypertension. Preferred drug include methyl-dopa, labetalol, nifedipine in that order. Methyl-dopa is less frequently available now, so we start with nifedipine and labetalol. Clonidine is a good drug which can be given. However, it is not proven in various trials. And when talking about beta blockers, lots of these patients are on atenolol. Like our patient was on atenolol, which is absolutely contraindicated in pregnancy as it has been linked with IUGR. Talking about vasodilators, hydralazine has been used in pregnancy. However, it is associated with some side effects. If we have to give a diuretic, the choice should be thiazide, and spironolactone should never be given. And ASARB are contraindicated in pregnancy and at the period of breastfeeding. So also, it is important to note that we should treat uremia early. Elective start of dialysis should be done as soon as the BUN increases to more than 50 to 60 milligram per deciliter. However, this needs to be individualized. It is not a dictum for all patients, but this is a general blanket kind of a guideline. Uremia is related to poor outcomes both for the mother and the baby. The uremic milieu is not healthy for the baby, and that needs to be treated as early as possible. Once a pregnant patient with CKD delivers, there is no contraindication per se for breastfeeding, which should be definitely encouraged. Only if the patient is on a drug like ACRB, which needs to be started very early. If someone is having a proteinuric kidney disease like a diabetic nephropathy, where ACRB is, really helps, only then breastfeeding can be contraindicated. Otherwise, breastfeeding should be encouraged in all pregnant patients who have delivered and are having chronic kidney disease. Postpartum, we have to watch very closely for thrombotic episode. CKD patients after getting pregnant, they are at a very high risk of developing thrombotic episode and also high risk of developing postpartum sepsis, puerperal sepsis, urinary sepsis, and puerperal sepsis involving the uterus and the vagina. So these things are to be closely monitored. And one more thing which should be closely monitored here is renal function. Quite a few times we have seen that patients go through the pregnancy uneventful and then post-delivery their renal function worsens, and this should be kept in mind, and this should be closely checked. Coming to our case 4 quickly, Sonam is a lady who is on maintenance hemodialysis for a glomerular disease, which is IgA nephropathy. So what do you feel? What are the chances that whether she can get pregnant, or she does not have any chance, she can never get pregnant, or she can get pregnant but the odds are very less? So the correct answer here is that even a pregnant patient on maintenance hemodialysis with established no kidney function can get pregnant. The odds are though less. So we should keep this in mind, that patients on dialysis can get pregnant, and it is very important to actively discuss contraception with them. Many times even the physician and the family members feel that because the patient is so critically ill or the patient is so unwell, they are very less likely to get pregnant and they forget about contraception. That is not the case. We have had accidental pregnancies in these ladies, and then they have a very poor outcome. Whenever we are planning a pregnancy in a kidney disease patients, it should always be a planned pregnancy and not an accidental pregnancy. So it is very important to discuss in every visit the topic of contraception with these patients. Preferred contraception for a kidney disease patient is intrauterine contraceptive device. If that is somehow not possible, then progesterone only pills should be given. Estrogen based pills should be avoided because one, they can cause lupus flare, and also they can cause worsening of hypertension, and they are more prone for thrombotic episodes on estrogen pills. Barrier contraception is practiced by various patients, but then its failure rate is high. So we do not encourage barrier contraception per se. If the patient has completed the family, the terminal thing like vasectomy or his tubectomy should be encouraged. Once the patient goes on advanced kidney disease or is on dialysis, the best way if she can get pregnant with best outcome is with kidney transplant. Kidney transplant restores fertility, and also the patients who are post-transplant have a relatively smooth pregnancy and postpartum course. So if a young lady like Sonam comes to me and tells me that she wants to get pregnant, I would advise her to wait till she gets transplanted done. And once transplant is done, she should be waiting for 1 year, and once the graft function is stable after transplant, then she is fit for getting pregnant. Quickly coming to the last topic for the day, that is urinary tract infection in pregnancy. Urinary tract infections are of two types, symptomatic and asymptomatic. We divide the urinary tract into two parts. Everything above the bladder is upper urinary tract. Everything below the bladder is lower urinary tract. Lower urinary tract thing is called cystitis. Upper is called pyelonephritis. Whenever a patient has fever or systemic signs, that means that she has pyelonephritis and not cystitis. Cystitis only has localized symptoms like increased frequency, dysuria, etc. And then there is a condition known as asymptomatic bacteriuria. Our next case is Mrs. Rekha. She is a 29-year-old lady. She does not have any comorbidity. She is not actually a kidney disease patient, but in 3rd month of gestation, when she is asymptomatic, on a routine checkup, she is found to have a urinary culture positive for 10⁵ colony counts of E. coli. Now, what we should do for this patient? Should we closely follow up? With every visit, we should just do urine routine. She is otherwise asymptomatic. We should just reassure that as you're asymptomatic, just don't do anything. Just drink lots of fluids. Or we should treat her with a sensitive antibiotic. The answer to this question lies in the fact that how is bacteriuria in pregnancy different from normal non-pregnant patients? The same organism, same species, same virulence, that is E. coli, that is the most common cause of UTI in any patient. But the pregnant mother handles this bacteria differently. As you see here in this graphic, there is lots of factors responsible for pregnant or asymptomatic bacteria to progress to pyelonephritis, which is smooth muscle relaxation, urethral dilatation, the pressure which the baby puts on the maternal bladder, the immunomodulation which happens with the pregnancy. All of this makes the patient who's having bacteriuria only more prone to develop pyelonephritis. So in general population, we do not treat asymptomatic bacteriuria because their risk of developing into pyelonephritis is not very high, which is not the case in pregnancy, where the risk of developing pyelonephritis with asymptomatic bacteriuria is actually very high. So the patients who are having prior urinary tract infections, diabetics, urinary tract abnormalities like reflux nephropathy, stone diseases, people who with increased parity and lower socioeconomic status, these are the patients which are especially at high risk of developing asymptomatic bacteriuria, and they should be screened for the same. This is another question which asks, ABU, that is asymptomatic bacteriuria, is in pregnancy is associated with increased risk of which of the following? And as all of you will agree, the answer here is all of the above. ABU is associated with increased risk of all the maternal and fetal complications in various trials. So the correct answer for this patient is that as Mrs. Rekha is having a significant ABU, we should be treating her with sensitive antibiotics. We should be treating her only after we get a report of culture sensitivity, and we should be treating with only sensitive antibiotics and not empirically. We should be following her up every week after a week of treatment to document complete sterilization of the urine. And also, so if after 2 courses of therapy, the bacteriuria persists, or if she is having any kidney abnormality like reflux or stone disease, she should be put on suppressive therapy till she delivers a healthy baby. And also, some people might think that because she is on therapy, we should be doing monthly cultures, but that is not needed. One culture should be repeated at the beginning of 3rd trimester, only to prove that the suppressive therapy is working. The choice of drug of choice for acute cystitis and ABU in pregnancy are amoxicillin, amoxiclav, and the same cephalexin, cefprioxime. Even TMP-SMX can be given. Nitrofurantoin and phosphomycin can be given once the 1st trimester is over. However, it is to be avoided in pyelonephritis, and it is given only in cystitis as the drug doesn't get accumulated in the kidney. It only goes to the bladder. It doesn't goes to till the kidney. Coming to something more serious than only bacteriuria or only cystitis, what happens if someone gets acute pyelonephritis in pregnancy? This is most common in 2nd and 3rd trimester, and up to 20% of these patients develop various complications, namely anemia, sepsis, shock, respiratory insufficiency, and acute kidney injury. And they are also at a high risk for developing preterm birth or stillbirth. So acute pyelonephritis in pregnancy should be treated as early as possible and with a good protocol of treatment. All these patients should have blood cultures and lactate done if they are in severe sepsis. And also patients with renal colic or a calculous disease who are diabetics or who have had prior neurosurgery, who are on immunosuppression like steroids or other drugs like in transplant, and who have had recurrent episode of pyelonephritis, they warrant an imaging in a case of pregnancy. This is important to note that not every UTI in pregnancy warrant a urinary tract imaging or a ultrasound of the kidneys. These are the patients where a ultrasound of the kidney should be definitely done. When a patient of acute pyelonephritis, we should be ruling out other differentials which closely mimics pyelonephritis, like intraamniotic infections with or without preterm labor, which actually presents with other complaints like fever, abdominal pain, premature rupture of membranes, etc. And also placental abruption sometimes can mimic acute pyelonephritis when it presents with back pain, vaginal bleeding, and rigid and tender uterus. After ruling out all the other DDs, patient should be started on parenteral antibiotic till patient is afebrile. At some centers this is not possible, especially at peripheral centers where IV admission is not possible. So there is a study which have shown that even IM ceftriaxone can be given followed by oral therapy, and the patient should be observed for 48 hours. If afebrile, then the oral therapy can be continued. Drug of choice for acute pyelonephritis when the disease is mild to moderate is again ceftriaxone, cefepime, aztreonam, and ampicillin gentamicin. These are the renally corrected doses. However, when the patient is having severe pyelonephritis, we should be giving them penicillin, tazobactam, meropenem, atrapenem, or doepenam. If fever persists beyond 48 hours, we should be repeating a culture and getting an ultrasonography of the kidneys done. Once the patient is afebrile, oral treatment should be given for a minimum of 10 to 14 days. And once someone is treated with pyelonephritis, they should be put on continuous prophylaxis till delivery. So if someone gets pyelonephritis in the second trimester, she will be getting a prophylactic drug till the end of delivery. Pyelonephritis per se is not, even if it is serious, is not an indication for emergent delivery. And if there is, if a gynecologist wishes to induce the patient for obstetric indication, it is seen that the outcome is better if they wait till the patient is afebrile, if it is possible to wait. Sometimes there's a consideration of tocolysis or administration of tocolytic agents in patients with acute pyelonephritis. This is important because sometimes pyelonephritis can be associated with preterm labor. And if in a patient who has not completed 34 weeks, like if someone is between 28 to 34 weeks and the patient is having pyelonephritis, but there are no other complications, then there is some benefit of delaying the labor by at least 48 hours so that we can give steroids and we can improve the fetal outcome. However, this should be individualized in case-to-case basis, and this is contraindicated in patients who are very critically ill, like that in sepsis, high risk for ARDS or pulmonary edema. One word about antibiotics in pregnancy, use of antibiotics. This is in general, not for UTI, in general for any illness. If we want to give antibiotics in pregnancy, this is more important also in kidney disease patients. Aminoglycoside, tetracycline, quinolones, and imipenem are contraindicated in pregnancy. Ceftriaxone has a very high protein binding, and sulfonamides, these are to be avoided just before the delivery because they can have, they predispose the baby for bilirubin displacement and kernicterus. MPSMH should be avoided in first trimester because it is an anti-metabolite and it eats up all the folic acid available in the body, and baby can develop neural tube defects and also at the term. Nitrofurantoin should also be avoided in the first trimester and at the term because it is a high risk of hemolysis in patients with G6PD deficiency. The last word I want to say about this topic is that this is one area where the importance of multidisciplinary team approach cannot be underscored. This pregnancy and women's health in kidney disease will be incomplete if they see only a nephrologist or only a physician or only a gynecologist or only a neonatologist. Here, everyone will have to join hands and discuss each case on the case-to-case basis so that the pregnancy outcome is favorable, or in general, health of a woman is favorable. This is the summary of the talk in one slide. Women endure a high burden of kidney disease and at a higher risk of gender bias when it comes to kidney disease. Sexual dysfunction is common in women and CKD and warrants prompt diagnosis and treatment. Pregnancy in CKD is associated with maternal and fetal poor outcomes. However, still favorable outcome can be there with optimum care and team effort. In advanced CKD, kidney transplant is to be encouraged as it restores fertility and has least complications during pregnancy. Universal screening of all pregnant patients at 12 to 16 weeks of gestation with urine culture is to be encouraged, and treatment of asymptomatic bacteriuria during pregnancy is associated with better maternal and fetal outcome. Acute pyelonephritis should be promptly treated with parenteral broad-spectrum antibiotics. And at the bottom line, we should all remember that healthy mothers give rise to healthy babies and they secure the health of the future generations. So that gives rise to a healthy society in general. This is one quote which actually my mentor, Dr. Hase, who has taught me nephrology, always used to say that the best physician prevents the disease, mediocre physician treats the disease, and an inferior physician treats the complications. So I am a nephrologist. My role is majorly to treat mostly complications, but you all being physician, you have the power to actually preventing the disease, and I hope that we can join hands and prevent diseases and promote women's health in kidney failure patients. I agree that because this is an oration, the no questions and comments are not allowed, so I have my email ID and my Twitter handle. I am very active on Twitter. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to buzz me on either on a mail or on Twitter. Thank you so much.
Can you hear? Thank you, Dr. Divya, for your very lucid and informative talk. And real figures were eye-opener. And I was a good friend of Dr. Harsha Salkar. So we usually used to manage the pregnancy, that is in collaboration, because it was much more easier to call her and get her opinion immediately rather than that is a collaborative unit and everything. So we avoid that hassles, and really that has helped me. And the most important, what I said that really I realized the importance of this kidney unit when one of our classmates' wife was admitted with eclampsia, and she was very serious. And this I am telling you in the year that is around 1975. And really, when we work in collaboration with Mrs. Salkar, and really I am happy to say that we could save that woman. And our classmate is really says that yes, it is the only Harsha Salkar who has saved his wife. So really that is the importance of working in collaboration. Thank you, Divya, once again. It was really very eye-opener things, and especially when you touch that UTI in pregnancy, because it is a really asymptomatic bacteria which is really should be treated. That I also agreeing with you, because it lead to the either IUGR or low birth weight, and that was, and subsequently flaring of the infection. Thank you once again. Maybe Vandana say something.
Thank you so much, Divya. It was very lucid and comprehensive talk. You have covered everything which a nephrologist should talk to the physician and gynecologist. Like the message should pass on to everybody, and it is very important that before pregnancy and after pregnancy care, and the doses adjustment and the care which should be taken, BP which should be monitored, proteinuria should be monitored. And I am really thankful to you for such a wonderful lecture. And the teamwork should also include physician, gynecologist, social worker, and the family. Family is very important. In India, the pressure on the lady for child birth is too much for bearing a child. So that team should include that also. So very nice lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, ma'am.
This year we don't have the physical conference, so by virtual mode only we are going to confer upon memento to Dr. Divya Bajpayee. I request President ma'am and Secretary ma'am, Dr. Alka Mukherjee and Dr. Mridul ma'am, to hand over memento to Dr. Divya, and later it will be couriered to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's my privilege. Thank you.
We are really proud to confer this on you, and this will be sent to you by courier. It was a wonderful oration, I must say. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'll just read Association of Medical Women in Nagpur. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Association of Medical Women in Nagpur, 6th February 2021. 5th Dr. Harsha Salkar Memorial Oration conferred on Dr. Divya Bajpayee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Divya, I just wanted to quote something. The influence of a great teacher can never be erased. And from your crystal clear concept and confidence. It is, I feel you are the appropriate choice for today's oration. और डॉक्टर सालकर मैडम
Definitely.
जहाँ भी होंगे आपको देख के बड़े खुश होंगे. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Certainly. It was wonderful.
I'm happy that I could do justice to this great oration. Like, I have heard so much about Dr. Salkar. I was afraid if I'll do
Yes.
justice to it.
Very good. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Divya. Thanks a lot.
Up to the mark, I must say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So now you join AMWI Mumbai branch.
I will
so much.
definitely do that. Thank you.
And applause.
Yes.
Thanks.
So after that wonderful oration, now we move on to the second part of the today's meet. That is the panel discussion on the hot burning topic of COVID-19 vaccination. Too much information, too much discussions around many vaccines coming, and daily one issue is coming up in the news, and everybody is just confused. Vaccine लेना है कि नहीं लेना है, कौन सा लेना है? So many myths and facts around us. So we have a expert panel to enlighten us and clear all our doubts. The panelists for the today's topic are Dr. Radha Munje ma'am, Dr. Dipti Chand ma'am, and Vinita Bhatia ma'am. And to moderate the discussion, I invite Dr. Rajeshri Khote ma'am, who is Associate Professor of Medicine and COVID in charge in AIIMS Nagpur. She is a wonderful, enthusiastic academician and will know from the panel discussion now. Ma'am, I'm handing over mic to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Sheetal, for your kind words. And I must congratulate Divya for a wonderful oration, the chairpersons and everyone. It was really a very, very wonderful oration. Now, we all know that this COVID pandemic has caused such a big havoc, and it has imposed a lot of demands on the healthcare system and the resources all over the world. And since the beginning, there was a UN cry, ki vaccine kab aayega, vaccine kab aayega, when we'll get the vaccine, when we'll able to go out, travel and do things that we want. The ICMR, which is the apex body for research in India, and the DCGI has fast-tracked all its procedures, and they have supported the development of COVID vaccine. And the vaccines have been rolled out now. But again, it has created a number of queries, confusion, like Sheetal said, in minds of everyone, and the general public as well as doctors also. And the vaccine is here. But what matters most? Is it getting the vaccine? Is it the side effects? Are we going to get a short-term or a long-term immunity? What is it about the vaccine that we all should know? And hence we thought of holding this panel discussion on the vaccine. And we have a very esteemed panel, a very experienced panel who will speak for the common man, the general public. The panel discussion has also been planned as a public awareness program. So now, without wasting too much of time, let me introduce the panelists to you. And today our panelists are, COVID is a disease which is posing a challenge to the pulmonologists and the physicians. A person having tremendous experience in managing all the respiratory cases and who has worked day and night treating serious respiratory illnesses due to COVID as well as due to non-COVID at Indira Gandhi Government Medical College. A person with a lot of seminars, forums, advisory boards, and publications to her credit. Please welcome Professor and Head of Department of Chest Medicine at IGGMCH, Nagpur, Dr. Radha Munje. Ma'am, we welcome you. Then we all know that GMC was a hub which catered to maximum number of COVID patients. And all of its wards had become COVID wards. Orthopedic ward, surgery ward, pediatric ward, all wards had become COVID wards. And there were 600 ICU beds in GMC. So from GMC, we have a person who is a European board certified intensivist. She is secretary of the API Vidarbha chapter, editor of its journal, and she coordinated the entire COVID management system at Government Medical College. She was also a part of the WHO Solidarity Trial, which was done for testing the various treatments in COVID. And she willingly agreed to be a part of this panel today. So please put your hands together to welcome Dr. Dipti Chand, who is an associate professor in medicine at GMCH Nagpur. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajeshri. Thank you.
Yeah. And this is definitely a public forum. So we thought that we should have a people's representative on the panel. And I immediately thought of a dynamic person who has been a fitness expert for last 16 years. She's working as a business head at One Above Fitness. And many of our members must be visiting the Worker Gym in the Milestone building. And all of you see her there. So she's working there and she's a very positively charged person. And one most noteworthy thing which I would like to mention about her is that her entire family was COVID positive. She cared for her family, but she took care of herself also. She followed all the COVID protective measures and she has been negative throughout, in spite of we testing her 3 to 4 times. So please welcome Mrs. Vinita Bhatia as people's representative. So Vinita, a warm welcome from all of us. And now let us set the ball rolling. So first I will come to you, Vinita, because you're the people's representative and we are so much about common man fighting this COVID infection. So let me ask you that after interacting with your clients and friends, how has the public perceived the arrival of this COVID vaccine?
Public has mostly welcomed it, like 90% of people have welcomed it, like, but then 10 to 20% people are still very skeptical, like what are the long-term effects. A lot of doubts are there regarding the vaccine, how long is going to give immunity and what are going to the side effects. People say like उसने लिया तो उसको ऐसा हो गया वैसे हो गया, she is hospitalized, a lot of vomitings हो रहे हैं, and because of that fear some people are not those who are in that profession, some people are not ready to take the vaccine. So these are the fear factors that is in general public, but then most of them are really waiting like me, like once we have the vaccine, we can move out, go out, we can feel safe that way. So most of the people, 80 to 90% have welcome. Only 10 to 20% people are very skeptical about it. I cannot hear you. Hello?
Rajeshri ma'am,
unmute yourself.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you that how are the elderly people reacting to the vaccine? I mean, elderly people must be coming to your gym, exercising, trying to be fit.
Yeah, elderly people previously, like we had lot of elderly people, like 60 plus, 70 plus. Our eldest client was 86 years old. Dr. Manjula Rodgin, she has been gymming with us since a long time, all heavy, good training exercises. Daily she will come, drive, and a very active lady. But then with the circumstances, all elderly, like after 65, government has not given permission for them to come and exercise the gym. So they are going for walks and doing home exercises. But those exercises are quite light that they use in gyms. You get a lot of variations. So, but then since they are not allowed at the moment, and they don't feel very safe to come in the crowd. No elder people are not coming unless and until they have vaccine. After that only they will start. This is what they say. It's like that. But exercises of elders have suffered, I think, because initially they were not going out for walking also. So even when I see my mother-in-law and all, they are still not going out and doing exercise, just home exercises, pranayama and a little bit of house exercises. So exercises have suffered a lot, and eventually their health as well. Is the thing.
Okay, I want to ask you that does the public have any concern regarding this process of vaccination? That is, are they confused कि हम कैसे register करें, किसके पास जाए, and all that?
Yeah, everybody has that confusion. Everybody, I mean, they don't know. Government is going to approach. We have to enroll on a site, so they are not at all clear about what's going to happen. In fact, we also do not know very clearly. Like some of them are applying on the site, but then it's firstly the health workers, and then next month, like 50 plus, all 50 plus will be getting that much clarity is there. But then how they are going to approach or we have to go, nobody knows very well. So we are not very clear about that.
Yeah, so that's really true. And now let us move on to our experts so that they clear all our doubts. So Radha, I would like to shed some light on the Indian situation, right? So what are the vaccines which are available to us And what is the difference? We know that it's Covaxin, Covishield, some more are in pipeline. So what is the basic difference between? Because the public is confused, and you must also be getting so many phones saying that "Kaun sa lu? Covishield lu ya Covaxin lu?" So what is your take on that? Unmute yourself, Radha.
That's I think a wonderful question and a very basic one. And for me also, it's not very easy to understand. But let me tell you that we have lots of vaccines which have been prepared. Actually, the differences in vaccine is because of the way it has been prepared and which constituent of that particular COVID-19 virus is being used and what type of vector is being used to give this vaccine. So we have vaccines which are RNA based, DNA based, then having non-replicating viral vectors, replicating viral vectors, inactivated, then live attenuated. Sometimes we have a protein subunit or a virus-like particle and some unknown which only consolidates probably the virion. I'm not aware about the details of that. Many vaccines have been thus derived and have been tried, and I'm sure there have been more than 200 vaccines which has gone into the preclinical stage. But as we all know that any vaccine when it comes to market, it has to go from various studies or what we call as the clinical trial phases. And the people I know are very skeptical and they feel that the vaccine, everybody wanted to have a vaccine, but once the vaccine arrived, everybody has started thinking that it's too early and perhaps these vaccines have not been tested enough. But let me assure you that unless the vaccines have passed the stage 2B or 3 and 3A at least, they cannot be introduced for patients' use. And that is why we have it is approved under EUA, that is emergency use. And now we have around say 4 vaccines which are licensed to be used. And the commonness that we have been now talking is that we have 2 vaccines. One is developed by AstraZeneca, which is a Covaxin which is being given, and the other is of Pfizer. Did I confuse between the two?
Yeah. You
Yes.
have. Covishield is developed by AstraZeneca.
Covishield is developed by AstraZeneca and is being manufactured and marketed by Serum Institute. And Covaxin is by Bharat Biotech and along with ICMR. And there have been a lot of discussions about the efficacy and safety. But as of now, both the vaccines have almost equal efficacy, but it's predicted that Covaxin would have more of it. But there is a fear about it only because the phase 3 trials of Covaxin have been limited. And so what is now being given would be probably treated as good as a phase 3 one. And that is why a consent is required. Of course, whenever a consent is asked, people are worried, but I'm sure Dipti would be adding her own experience that in spite of consent being taken and then the Covaxin is being administered, there are no much side effects that we come across.
Okay, and can you just elaborate on the schedule of vaccination?
Yes, the schedule
how many
is simple.
shots? How many shots
I'll
we
be
have to
speaking
take?
on two things at first. First one is anybody who has not had COVID in the recent past, they can take this vaccine anytime. But now that we have a first-hand experience of giving the vaccine, we should appeal to everybody who goes to the vaccination site that be sure that you do not have any symptoms which can predict a COVID infection. So if you have symptoms of body ache, malaise, fever, rhinorrhea, or even URI, it's better to rule out active COVID infection by doing the RT-PCR test and then go ahead with taking the vaccine. Once you have received the first dose, you are due for a booster dose after a month. That is 28 days. However, if you are not able to take this on 28th day or after 4 weeks, you can take it any time between even 6 weeks. And there have been studies that it can be delayed to 12 weeks also if it is needed. There are various studies coming up, but I would not add much to add to the confusion. So it suffices to say that you take your vaccine today, then after 4 weeks, you have to take your booster. As of now, the directives are that perhaps you may need to take this COVID vaccine annually. There are reports that this may be effective as much as 6 years also, but we do not have a data which has been received and consolidated and analyzed. Rajeshri, you are mute. Rajeshri, you are mute. Unmute.
Yeah, what are the common side effects which we expect with this vaccine? Because that is the fear in the public. कि
Yes.
मुझे क्या होगा vaccine
क्या
लेने के बाद?
होगा? Actually, these vaccines are very, very safe. And the commonest, first is we should look at what does a vaccine do. So for any vaccine that you receive, and you must have received in your lifetime, the feeling of soreness at the site of injection is very common. You can have redness, swelling, itching, or even pain, which I think is a normal reaction with any vaccine. Other side effects which may be because of this particular vaccine can be of headache and tiredness, which has been reported by 50% of the participants. Few of them had muscle aches and a generalized feeling of being not well or myalgia. Few people had a feeling of feverishness or cold, and few did record a temperature somewhere around 100 to 101. However, all these symptoms have responded to mild treatment which anybody can advocate, and that is a tablet of paracetamol.
Okay, can someone get COVID after vaccination? Because people feel that we are
Yes.
having a mini COVID-like
Yes,
symptoms.
yes. That is what I started with, Rajeshri, and that is one of the best questions I feel, because it emphasizes what is the scenario. Let us understand that COVID pandemic is not over. We are getting good number of cases. So it's likely that somebody who goes to take a vaccine is already infected and did not have symptoms. And after vaccination, for say after a day or two, if there is a persistent fever, rhinorrhea, body ache, and you get tested and RT-PCR is positive, this is perhaps because you have been infected prior to vaccination. That is one part of it. Now, the second part of it is that let us be very clear that people have been looking at vaccine as some type of magic wand which allows you to go out and enjoy life. But we have to remember what we started on day one of the COVID pandemic is that we will always have new normal. It's never going to be the old normal. So even if you have received vaccine, there are guidelines that use of mask and social distancing is mandatory, along with hand hygiene, cough hygiene, or cough etiquette advised to anybody who is not well. So the second part is after vaccination, yes, you can get COVID infection, but this vaccination is going to protect you towards the serious forms of disease or mortality associated with COVID vaccine.
Yeah, that you have made very clear. So thanks for that. And now I'll move on to Chan ma'am. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Yes. So I think you look tired because of the COVID situation in GMC.
Admission day today.
Yeah, but still, so kind of you to be here today. So Radha ma'am said something about emergency use of vaccine and something regarding efficacy of vaccine. Now people don't understand what is efficacy and what it is meant by emergency use of vaccine. Can you just elaborate on it?
Yeah. Emergency use authorization, we call it as EUA. So emergency use authorization means normally a vaccine takes about 10 years to develop. Now, since the COVID started last year in December, came on to Nagpur in March, in India in January. So we have had just 1 year of it. And all of our trials for vaccine, they started somewhere around summer. So May to July, the vaccine trials have started. Now, eventually we have had only 6 to 7 months of the time period when we have had the trials of the vaccine. So to develop an idea that which vaccine are we going to develop, whether it's a messenger RNA vaccine or it is a live attenuated vaccine or a killed vaccine like we have in this Covaxin that we have. So these are different vaccines which we are using. So the eventual time that we have had is only of 6 months all the trials which are there, the interval between the first and the second dose has been about 28 days, in some 21, in some 28, and the follow-up is again the next dose after that of 60 days. So all the trials which have been done after the second dose have been till 60 days only. So that is why we do not know that how long is the immunity going to last. Now these patients who have not been followed up for long, so since we have seen the antibody titers, we have followed them up for 60 days after the second dose of the vaccine. So we use it as emergency use authorization, and the government has said, okay, you start using it, and then that is what it is. Now coming to efficacy and effectiveness, the definition of efficacy is in control settings. You have a person who has been given a vaccine under a trial period, you have selected your subject and followed it up very scrupulously. Effectiveness is something when we go into the market, when actually it goes to the public and into what actually is happening. So those are the phase 4 trials for many drugs that we have. So effectiveness we are yet to test. About efficacy in control trials is available. I think I'm clear.
Yeah, very good. Thanks a lot. So when you say that efficacy is 60% or 90%, it is what you have found in trials. But it might be much more also or slightly less also when it goes to public, right? Yeah.
So in terms of the first vaccine, the Oxford AstraZeneca, so they had a full dose of vaccine which was to be given in the first and the second dose. And some patients, they received a little less dose of the first dose, and then they realized that this dose was given less. And when the trial, the results were evaluated, they found that the full dose vaccine had a 70% efficacy, but the ones which received a half dose first dose had a 92% efficacy. So that is what they're going to follow for the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. And the other vaccine which is there available, the Covaxin from the biotech, the Indian vaccine. So in that Bharat Biotech, it is that it is effective. It is as good as the other vaccine and the efficacy is 90% in that vaccine. So both of them are comparable. What we are using, both of them are comparable.
Yeah, so that's good. So public shouldn't bother too much regarding whether they are receiving Covishield or Covaxin. Efficacy wise, they are equal. Yeah. So what has?
Yeah, one more thing. In terms of Covaxin, what happened is the results of the Covaxin, which the ICMR trial has taken, are going to be announced in February.
Yeah.
So, but because it was an Indian vaccine, so they said we might as well give. So 6 medical colleges in the state have been given the Covaxin. I myself took Covaxin. Perfectly fine, no problems at all, not even local pain, nothing. So I don't think we have to be so much afraid about the side effects. I am in charge for the adverse events following immunization. We call it as AEFI the forum. So we have had only 15 patients with side effects which have come to medical college, only 15, out of which only 6 were hospitalized. One had a severe urticaria. Other than that, little local pain, little rash, and one patient had a little lymphadenopathy, jugular-digastric, and vomiting. So there aren't many side effects. We really don't have to worry about it.
That's very reassuring. And that's really going to be very reassuring for all our doctors and our public. So, and I would like to ask you, what precautions should one take prior to vaccination?
See, when we give a vaccine, essentially like any other vaccine, we should not be in a state of fever or infections as such. Like Dr. Munje said that we should not be carrying an infection and going into the vaccination room. So we have to ensure that we're all right. There was written in the Covishield pamphlet that patients on blood thinners should not be given. Vaccine. There was a lot of doubt regarding the blood thinners. Now, since our target population is the cardiac, the hypertensive, the diabetic, the malignancies, so all these patients are the ones which are the target group for the vaccination. So regarding the blood thinners, it is that even before the ICMR had put up a notification, DCGI put up a notification with the Serum Institute that please change your pamphlet. It's not all blood thinners. Under the heading of blood thinners, we have antiplatelet drugs and anticoagulants. The ones which should take precautions are the ones with coagulation disorders, who have congenital coagulation disorders, who have liver disorders leading to coagulopathy. Patients on oral anticoagulant drugs should not be taking, or like for any surgery, we stop the anticoagulant drugs before surgery. patients on dual antiplatelet drugs, like patients who has had a recent infarction. So if you are able to, according to the clinical condition, we may stop the dual antiplatelet drugs about 2 to 3 days before that. Single antiplatelet drug, aspirin or clopidogrel, is not a contraindication for vaccination.
Yeah, I had listened to Dr. Ganga Khedkar, who's a pioneer in development of vaccine. So he said that aspirin need not be stopped before vaccination. And patients using aspirin may just get slightly more swelling at the local site or a hematoma formation at the local site, but it doesn't warrant stopping of aspirin. So that is one clear message we can give, that those who are elderly on aspirin, they need not stop aspirin, but dual antiplatelets, they should stop for 3 days before vaccination. Is it? Yeah.
Yes. Now, another thing is that patients who are immunocompromised in terms of malignancies or immunosuppressant drugs, sickle cell patients, malignancies, renal patients, because they are basically immunologically not so competent, the effect of the vaccine may not be as good as an immunocompetent person. So like for hepatitis, we used to give an extra dose of a double dose and an extra dose of the hepatitis B vaccine. Here, the trials are yet to be done on the doses and all. So we do not know about the immunocompromised patients right now, as of now.
Yeah, and Dipti, many people have been asking that should we do an RT-PCR before taking vaccine, or should we first get our antibodies tested before taking vaccine? So what is your advice regarding that?
No, there is, if a person has had COVID recently, he's just come out of it. So we wait for at least 8 weeks after the COVID has finished. But as such, it's not recommended that you do your antibody titer before taking the vaccine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
and for success of vaccine, it is better that we keep it very simple.
Yeah.
Isn't it? There shouldn't be any mandatory tests. Yes. Yeah. So that is a very good, very good points that both all of you have cleared. Vinita, do you want to ask anything to our panelists? Vinita, unmute yourself.
Radha, unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Radha and Vinita, both unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Yes, Vinita, you want to ask something to our panelists?
Yeah, like if elderly are not going to take the vaccine, so they are the most susceptible ones. So what do? They are not going out also, and then as it is, they are staying totally inside. So what do they do?
As a safety parameter, it was that the trials were done above 18 years of age till 65 years of age, the initial part of it. Now in UK, what they are doing is that even elderly people, after first dose of vaccine on the 29th day, you have a 60% efficacy of the vaccine. That means 60% are protected. After 60 days, that means of the first vaccine, when the second dose is given, another 30 days pass after that, then the efficacy becomes 90 to 92%. So in US, what they're doing, they're vaccinating all the elderly people also with one dose. So they say that even if and like Radha said, the second dose can be given till 12 weeks. So the UK policy now is that even if the second dose is given after 10 to 12 weeks, it's fine. Initially, let us cover all our population which are at risk, the elderly people.
Yes, Radha, you want to say something?
Yes, I want to add something. And because Vinita is here, who is representing all people who are non-medicos, and she is probably the link between the two, Vinita. Yeah. And I'll shift over to Hindi for a better explanation. Yeah. India is in हमारे देश में there have been a lot of issues which were first debated when the vaccine लाने के पहले बहुत कुछ debate हुआ है कि vaccine किस तरीके से लाना है. And once the efficacy was ensured, और जैसे ही बोला emergency use authorization, यानी conditional access है ये injection को. ये वैक्सीन मार्केट में नहीं बेचा जाएगा जब तक के the government and other regulatory authorities are not sure that the vaccine it is not about the efficacy and safety, यानी वो काम करता है कि नहीं और वो safe है कि नहीं, that is not an issue. The government चाहती है, the administration wants that spurious vaccine should not come into market. And that is why the vaccine is being given only at vaccination center. That is first thing. दूसरी हमको पता है कि हमारा geographically, sociologically, culturally is a very diverse country. तो ये country में हमने एक ही time में vaccine को लाया है. तो इसको किस तरीके से लाया जाए? So the best thing what they did was that they utilized what we use at the time of elections. जैसे हमारे पूरे देश में elections होते हैं, so in spite of all differences all over the country, the vaccine has been started from north to south and east to west. यानी देश के हर कोने में ये वैक्सीन को लाया गया है. Then looking at the priorities, who are at more risk? We agree that elderlies and people who have comorbidities, उनको बहुत ज़्यादा रिस्क है ये इन्फेक्शन और कॉम्प्लिकेटेड डिजीज होने की. बट एज ऑफ नाउ द कोरोना वॉरियर्स आर एट मोर रिस्क बिकॉज दे हैव टू गो एवरी डे एंड फेस कोविड पेशेंट. इसलिए सबसे पहले ये डॉक्टर्स एंड फ्रंटलाइन वर्कर्स के लिए लाया है. सो अलॉन्ग विद द डॉक्टर्स पूरे हेल्थ केयर वर्कर्स जैसे नर्सिंग स्टाफ, अटेंडेंट, स्वीपर्स, द टेक्नीशियंस एंड द रिसेप्शनिस्ट हु आर वर्किंग, उनको सबसे पहले ये वैक्सीन का लाभ मिल रहा है बिकॉज एज ऑफ नाउ वी हैव लिमिटेड डोजेस ऑफ द वैक्सीन. बट नो सूनर डज इट गो इनटू रोलिंग, वी आर गोइंग टू हैव मोर एंड मोर डोजेस. So the next beneficiaries are going to be the elderly population. Now who are the elderly population and why elderly? It is not only the age, लेकिन elderly population में comorbidities रहती हैं जैसे blood pressure, diabetes, kidney disease and so on and so forth. इसलिए elderlies are the population who are going to be benefited most after the healthcare worker. ये elderlies में भी उन्होंने दो ग्रुप बनाए हैं. First group is 60 years and above and the second group is 50 to 60 years. So because we are bringing it in a phase wise manner, those who would be vaccinated would be 60 years and above so that a better protection is offered to them. उनके बाद में 50 to 60 years. Because ये वैक्सीन को emergency use authorization मिला है, less than 18 years are not being advocated this vaccine as of now. लेकिन जैसे जैसे लोगों को वैक्सीन मिलता जाएगा, हमारा खुद का डेटाबेस इतना अच्छा होगा कि सचमुच जितने साइड इफेक्ट्स के बारे में लोगों के मन में डर है, उतने साइड इफेक्ट्स आते हैं क्या, हाउ दे आर बीइंग मैनेज्ड एंड ऑल. और जब हमारा कंट्री रिलेटेड, लाइक मोस्ट ऑफ द डेटा कम्स फ्रॉम द वेस्ट बिकॉज दे स्टार्टेड डूइंग इट अर्लियर. लकीली नाउ हमारा जो पैंडेमिक है वो चल रहा है, बट वी आर ऑन द डिक्लाइन आफ्टर द फर्स्ट फेज. There has never been the second wave or the third wave जो anticipate हमने किया था. Post Diwali we were anticipating कि second phase आएगा कोविड का and it would be again very difficult to manage all cases. Luckily वो नहीं हुआ है. So this is the best time that you receive a vaccine, get an immunity to the disease. Chances of second wave और वो second wave का जो क्या बोलते हैं impact है वो बहुत कम रहेगा. Then there is one thing which I would like to add that as we are doing this discussion and जैसे विनीता है and common people and like Deepik and Rudol and Rajeshri and all my medico friends, we all know कि जब वैक्सीन नहीं था हमको वैक्सीन चाहिए था. आज वैक्सीन आ गया है तो there is a hesitancy in taking vaccine and there has been a very good survey कि ये hesitancy क्यों है. तो देखा गया है कि जैसे या जब भी हम बोलते हैं इमरजेंसी यूज ऑथराइजेशन या कम दिनों में वैक्सीन बाहर आया है, तो सबसे पहले लोगों के मन में डर है साइड इफेक्ट्स का. Then as we always talk about Google Doctor, because the media and the Google and everything is so fast and been updated, people have started worrying that the vaccine has come very fast. So is it really safe? साइड इफेक्ट्स का डर है, सेफ्टी का डर है, इसके लिए लोग नहीं ले रहे. फिर बहुत लोगों को लगता है कि अगर वैक्सीन लेने के बाद अगर कोविड होने ही वाला है, so that means perhaps the vaccine is not effective enough जितना हमको लगता है. Then the third is a universal phenomenon. जैसे कई बार हम बोलते हैं भाई नहीं मुझे ही क्यों, तो कोविड के बारे में लोगों को ऐसा लगता है कि मुझे नहीं होने वाला, मैं बाहर नहीं जाता हूँ या जाती हूँ तो कोविड मुझे नहीं होने वाला. So I may not go get a COVID is another reason. Then third is against vaccine. लोगों को लगता है ये वैक्सीन कुछ असर करने वाला नहीं है and I'm totally against taking vaccine. जो होना है हो जाएगा. मेरे सामने तो 10 लोगों को कोविड हुआ और वो तो अच्छे हो गए. So like people are against COVID and then there are other reasons which have not been listed. लेकिन ये this has been seen as a reason of hesitancy towards vaccine. And I think our panel discussion mainly aims at doing away with this hesitancy also.
Yeah. Dipti, what is your take? Yeah.
My take is that out of all the trials which were done with Covishield also, when they developed the infection thereafter, about 40,000 patients were followed up, and the ones which they developed, there were very few patients, about 1%, less than 100 patients who developed the COVID after the vaccine. So of those 100 patients also, none of them went on a mechanical ventilator.
Yeah.
So that is very important, that even if they develop COVID, it doesn't go to the serious COVID part of it.
Yeah.
Any drug is not 100% effective. So is true for the vaccines also. So you wouldn't, if you get also, if by chance you get, it would be a mild COVID, not a very serious COVID. So at least that protection, that is there, that you're not going to get a very serious COVID. So you might as well go ahead with the
Yeah, so I think
ये भी है कि अगर मुझे एक बार कोविड हो गया तो मुझे तो इम्यूनिटी आ गई, तो अब वैक्सीन लेने की क्या जरूरत है. So for that also I think Dipti, you should add a note that in spite of you have suffered from COVID, your antibodies may not persist for a longer time. So it's better to get vaccinated and have an immunity.
Because we do not have data that how long the antibodies are going to persist. So only time will tell that how long that immunity is going to last in our body.
Yeah, so I think as a panelist, all of us agree that we should all go and take vaccination with all due precautions and still continue with COVID protective behavior till we have more data, and let us all fight together to halt this pandemic. So
my message to you is, because we do not have many participants today, so we make a press note out of this and put it in the papers also, so that it reaches the public again, that there have not been many side effects as such. The ones which were there, within 2 days we were able to discharge them very nicely, so there was no issue at all with any of the vaccinations.
And
so confidently
people take tetanus so nicely, so it's just like taking a tetanus shot.
And in
Vinita, yes.
Yeah, there is one query. People are saying कि like youngsters, like 30, 35, they are अभी तक नहीं हुआ तो अब क्या होगा, अब क्या जरूरत है वैक्सीनेशन की. होना था तो तभी हो जाता जब सबको हुआ था, अब तक तो नहीं हुआ है, अब क्या होने वाला है. Now everything is like decreasing. अब क्या होगा तो अब क्यों लेना है वैक्सीन?
Can I answer your question?
Yeah, you have to.
There is something which is known as asymptomatic COVID.
Yeah.
Young are the patients who catch the infection, bring it home, infect the elderly, and they're the ones who suffer. So the young patients are the ones who should be vaccinated so that the elderly at home are protected. So they also form a very important target group. So it's not nahi hua, they don't know whether they had
and
it.
in fact, you know why we worry about this young population is क्योंकि ये सबसे मोबाइल है, ये घर से बाहर जाते हैं, ये ग्रुप्स में जाते हैं, ये पार्टीज करते हैं, they go out of station now. So they are actually more exposed and more susceptible to catch infection and bring it home.
Yes. In fact, one of the doctors asked me, अरे हमको क्यों वैक्सीनेट कर रहे हैं, हम तो मास्क यूज करते हैं, हम तो पीपीई यूज करते हैं, उनको करो जो बिना मास्क के बॉडी पे घूम रहे हैं, गर्म पेट में घूम रहे हैं और इन्फेक्शन फैला रहे हैं. So anyway, this panel agrees that we should definitely spread a positive message about vaccination. We should encourage vaccination and follow the COVID protective behavior. So thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a question, Rajeshri?
Sure. Yes. Let me just see how many questions I have in chat or question answer.
राधा और दीप्ति को मुझे पूछना है कि काइंडली गिव एडवाइस ऑन पोस्ट वैक्सीनेशन एडवाइजरी एज वेल, कि वैक्सीन लेने के बाद में क्या प्रिकॉशंस लेना है या क्या रिकमेंडेशंस है, व्हाट आर योर एडवाइसेस, सो दैट कंफ्यूजन और मिसकंसेप्शन और गलत एडवाइस नहीं मिलेगी.
I have two advice. One is वैक्सीन लेने के बाद आपको जो भी तकलीफ होती है, तो ये माइल्ड सिम्टम्स है, जस्ट बिकॉज यू आर अवेयर अबाउट इट, डू नॉट इग्नोर, inform your vaccination center so that our database is robust. Like somebody like Dipti who is collecting data will have that 50% of patient complained of soreness at the site, 40% complained about fever or joint pain or body ache, और 3 लोगों को क्रोसिन लेना पड़ा, या 101 फीवर था या विथ राइगर्स आया.
Correct.
2 लोगों को टेस्टिंग के बाद में RT-PCR पॉजिटिव आया, that means that vaccination center did not ask a prior history or probably you did not relay the
Volunteer.
history in spite of asking. Yes.
Correct.
तो ये आपने inform करना बहुत जरूरी है, which I feel is a message which must go out. Many of my
Yes.
own colleagues kept on telling in the group, but did not report to the vaccination center, and I have forwarded their data. That is first and foremost. And second is post vaccination, you have to continue to be
Correct.
normal and not
Correct.
a whole normal.
Correct. Yes.
Do not
Yes.
be overconfident.
Yeah.
So that continue with your safe distancing and mask and all.
Yes.
In fact, if we know our children, when they receive the DPT vaccines, they have fever for a day or two.
Yes.
Right.
So when you have fever, when you have local pain, you know that the antigen is working.
Yeah.
So it shows that the vaccine is effective. The second dose reaction is much less than the first dose.
Yes. Yes.
So
That's
just go ahead with
yeah,
it.
yeah. So thank you so much. It's really been very interesting. There have been questions, but I think we do not have too much time for that. And we will definitely ask for questions and I can forward it to the panelists. And now over to you, Sheetal. So thank you, Deepti, Vinita, Radha ma'am, and Mridul Chande ma'am. So thank you so much.
Yes, indeed, it was a very good, knowledgeful evening, a feast of knowledge to all of us.
Yes.
I hope both the sessions were wonderful and everyone enjoyed it. And I hope that the doubts about the vaccine are clear. Such a nice and clear-cut message given by our all the panelists that it's really safe and we should go forward to take the vaccines as well as promote in the society and allay the fears about vaccine in the general public. So now at the end, I call upon the Secretary of AMWN, Dr. Alka Mukherjee, to propose vote of thanks.
Thank you, Sheetal. It's amazing, mesmerizing session and oration. Million thanks to AMWN for arranging it. Turning to individual Thanksgiving. First of all, let me thank Dr. Ramesh Salkar sir for this Salkar madam's oration. Thank you so much, sir. The wonder orator, Dr. Divya Vajpayee. Thank you so much for today's oration. You were the apt choice for today's oration. And today's chairpersons, respected Dr. Purvar madam, my friend Dr. Vandana Paraskar, our panelist Dr. Radha Munji ma'am, Dr. Deepti Chand ma'am. Thank you so much for your valuable inputs and comments. Your presence made today's CME more graceful. And what to say about brain and beauty, Dr. Rajeshri Khote ma'am. She amalgamated the physician, the gynecologist, and general public in a single breath, isn't it? Thank you so much. She gently picked up the hot burning topic of COVID vaccine and threaded all of us together. Thank you so much. And दिल से धन्यवाद हमारी आज की जो क्या बोलेंगे इसे कोई अच्छा सा शब्द ढूंढना चाहूंगी आपके लिए डॉक्टर विनीता भाटिया मैम. She pleaded the आम जनता का side with all her grace and persona. Thank you so much. And my special thanks to our master of ceremony today, the beautiful Dr. Sheetal. She took lots of efforts for today's program. She was not well till today, I believe. So thank you, Sheetal, for accepting it. सबसे अंत में आप सब. Thank you so much. Everybody, your presence made a difference for today's CME. And though the attendance was less, but Sheetal, don't get disheartened. This always happens. But अच्छी CME होती है. और इसके बाद में इसका जो direct जो relay करवाने वाले हैं डॉक्टर जयश्री मैडम, राजेश्री मैडम, मुझे लगता है उन्होंने recording किया है. मैं देख रही थी recording was on. So it will be put on the website. So everybody will be able to see it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. And Rajeshri and AMWN, thank you for reminding me. I have been a physician sometime before I became a pulmonologist.
Nice to have you on the panel then. और सबसे अच्छा लगा कि आपने हिंदी में बात की तो और पब्लिक अवेयरनेस प्रोग्राम है ये सबको महसूस हो गया. So that was really wonderful on your part.
Thank you.